this is something I love and I've had it happen, is when a senior associate comes up to me and says, I want to own this part of the project.
But you have to own, like, truly own it. You have to own all the good, you have to own all the bad, and you have to own everything in between. Okay, welcome to episode 3 of the Future State podcast. Hopefully you tuned into the first 2, and we've been uploading clips. If you've been liking what you've been seeing and what you've been hearing, definitely follow us and interact. If you do comments, we'll react to your comments, and if you drop questions about your journey in consulting, we're happy to help coach you through some of those things and give you our thoughts. Today is episode 3. Episode 3, we want to talk, we've been getting a lot of interest around how, if you're an associate, how do you get to senior associate, right? There's it's your first job out of college, you land you land at your job, there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to do, but you're ambitious and you want to get to the next stage, you want to get to senior associate. And so how do you actually prepare yourself to do that really well, right? And so we want to talk about that today, which is looking for that promotion to senior associate, and how do you prepare yourself for that journey to drive to senior associate. So I'm John again. My background again is a bunch of years of consulting, then startup world for a few years, and then now Fortune 500. Now I do AI and Web3, Web3 crypto. You've seen Serena last couple episodes as well. Serena, you want to do a quick overview?
Hey, started off in consulting, moved then into a Fortune 100 company in the strategy side of the house, and then eventually found my place in the product management world, where then I spent time also at a startup, and then made my return back to the Fortune 500 scheme, and here I am leading product for B2B enterprise solutions.
Great. And then today we have Carrie as well. Carrie, you want to do a quick overview?
Yes. Hi, I'm an associate director of enterprise strategy at a professional services firm. Came over from external consulting, where I focused on growth strategy. So I know a little bit about consulting from internal and external lens, and happy to be on the podcast today.
Yeah, great. Okay, so today we're talking about getting that promotion for senior associate, right? And so maybe I'll start us off. What we should talk about real quick is in episode 1 we talked about this ladder, where every role and every title within a consulting organization in a project, there's an identity, right? So every layer, every step of that ladder, there is something that you are responsible for. And every person, associate, senior associate, manager, senior manager, and the way as it goes up, everyone has a role to play. And so, one really important thing to just set the stage is that you should understand where you are and what you're responsible for on that ladder, and then what the next step on that ladder is responsible for, right? So if you're an associate today, you should know exactly what you're responsible for, what your role is, what's expected of you. But if you want to get to senior associate, you also need to know what is expected of you and how to perform well as a senior associate, right? That's why, so you could set the marker on their journey and say, I want to prep myself for that marker, right? And so understanding that ladder is really important. So let's start there, right? So let's say today you're an associate. Let me ask you guys, what do you think is the responsibility of an associate?
I don't know, Serena, do you want to go first?
You can go. You're new, so you can chime in.
Yeah, and so I find that interesting. I just want to respond to something else you said first, though, John, which was knowing your role and knowing current and then next. And I think that's something that's really important, because if you think, I know an earlier podcast that you did was on performance management, and it's really critical to understand what's expected of you and what's expected next so that you can check that box. But at the same time, my perspective is a good associate never lets the box hold them back. So know your role, know your expectations, but continually try to do the absolute best you can as a professional. And for me as an associate, what that really comes down to is continued learning, continued curiosity, going outside of just the everyday of like, oh, I want to be on this project, but actually like taking certifications and seeking out mentors, bringing them research and showing you're engaged. So those are the types of things that I think about that really show to me a standout associate more than just someone who's checking like the career box.
Yeah, that's great. So as an associate, you want to be, looking for as many things as you can and learning and everything. Serena, what do you think? What is an associate responsible for in that step on the ladder?
Yeah, so very tactically, I think an associate is very much responsible for the tasks at hand and the deliverables at hand. And so, you may be the first year getting out of college, wide-eyed, doe-eyed, and therefore it's like, all right, I'm just here to, take the action that my manager has asked of me or my team leader has asked of me. And I think that is like baseline, what is expected. And then on top of that, right, are the aspects that Carrie just walked through around being curious, being proactive, asking for additional ways to help when you do have bandwidth and when you have excelled in your specific deliverable or few tasks that you're assigned to. So I think it's getting the basics right and then being proactive. And then the third is looking around and being curious about other parts of the company or projects that could be available to you.
Yeah.
I have something else to just add on that, if that's okay. So completely agree with that and want to emphasize, I think a lot of associates come in and they're like, I don't know this, I'm afraid, I'm not sure how far I should go because this is new to me. At least how I feel is I'd much rather see you try and do something new and reach and stretch than avoid something, because no one expects an associate to be perfect. No one's going to expect that you're coming in super polished, one draft, completely ready to go. So it's better to put yourself out there. That's how you learn than to get really nervous and try to stay in the box of what you do know or what you think you know from college or something like that.
That's such a good point. Which is, so to me, an associate is responsible for two things. One is learning as much as you can. And that's not like doing as perfect as you can. It's learning as much as you can, right? And so like, you're right out of college. You don't know anything, right? Like you don't know what you're supposed to do, what quality it's supposed to be. You don't know what a status report is. Like you don't know anything. But the point is you're supposed to learn. And so like, don't worry about getting it perfect, but worry about learning really well. So to me, your responsibility at that level, at that step on the ladder is you are supposed to learn as much as you can, as quickly as you can. Learn what is expected of you, what is quality, what is a status report, what is a deliverable, how do you do some kind of analysis? And so that's number one. You have to learn as much as possible. Number two, I think is you have to build trust, and that trust is build trust with your team. So as you work, because look, this is a team sport, right? As you work through deliverables or analysis or putting together notes or something and learning how to do those things, you are developing trust with the rest of your team to say, well, I trust John to do this thing. So that they don't have to question, they don't have to doubt that there's quality, right? Things that you know there shouldn't be typos, there shouldn't be grammar mistakes. They want to trust that you can deliver the thing that you're responsible for, or at the very least learn how to build that quality and build that trust, right? So that to me is really what you're supposed to do at an associate level. You guys agree with that?
Yes, I think also though something worth, and sorry, I have a scrunchie in my hand I'm playing with. But something that I think is really important we address as well is we're saying learning on that upfront part. But what does learning actually mean? Because there are a few ways you can learn as an associate, and learning isn't just about showing up and trying. It's about, I'd say, a few things. I'd say first is asking questions and deeply engaging. Why am I being asked to do this? What is it going to be used for? Can I find any examples of it being done previously so I can see what good looks like? So it's consistently being really curious in your projects, but then you've also got other sides of learning. So for example, I've worked with or known associates who come in and say, I like this type of consulting, this type of project. That's all I want to do. I'm going to be great at it. And they don't really reach beyond or try other opportunities, or if they're put on a project outside that scope, they're not interested because they like the other thing.
That's
and if
crazy.
you're not open-minded, you can't really learn, right? So sorry, John, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that's crazy because like you don't like if you're right out of college, you have no idea what kind of projects you like. You have no idea what kind of consulting you like, right? And so like closing yourself to learning what's out there is like insanity to me. Especially if you're in consulting where like the nature of the thing is like you try to find interest and passion in quite literally every topic that is presented to you. You have to find something interesting about every single thing. So being closed off there is yeah, you're right. I've also worked with associates that are like, yeah, so that would be an example of a bad associate. A good one would be like, you know, they listen to everything you say, and then you can watch them take feedback and then immediately employ that feedback into the next time they do it, right? Like even if it's something as simple as you got to take notes on a call, really easy stuff, right? But you know, I had an associate that was only taking notes of what the client said, but not taking notes of what our team says. Which is like, you know, initially like that seems obvious, but it's not to a first year associate. So, but being able to like pivot on feedback that you get is really important. Okay, what do you guys think about what about senior associate, right? So we understand the ladder, the step of the ladder for associate. What's the responsibility of the next step up? What's the responsibility of a senior associate?
So I think it's also worth talking about the bridge from associate to senior associate, because a lot of what we were just talking about trying new things, learning, employing that. I think to get to senior associate, it's not just good enough to be curious and employing feedback. A good associate is already training not only their peers, but also the next wave of associates coming in. And so when you're moving into senior associate, you have to maintain that curiosity, that desire to learn, but at the same time, you need to actually be helping to upskill others around you already. You're not waiting to manager to start, quote unquote, managing and upskilling people around you. So that's my thought.
So I think for my experience, what I have seen senior associates do well or start to transition into is taking ownership. So greater ownership of projects and initiatives. So, you know, moving from just one task to maybe an entire epic or, you know, multi-deliverable scope and having that ownership end to end. So I think that's one example. And then the second aspect is probably the complexity and ambiguity. So having less of a playbook or, you know, articulated steps that are defined for you up front, but you defining what those steps could be for yourself, as well as probably a peer or, you know, another kind of direct report below you. And then the third element is probably an engagement of a broader set of stakeholders in a project or on the client side. So starting to have some of that visibility beyond just your direct project team, but also engaging in a broader set of folks that you're working across.
Yeah. So if I were to compare that to like the associate, right, is that as an associate, you're responsible for learning and tactically, you're probably putting together like pieces of a deliverable. You're responsible for like the analysis of notes, or you're summarizing notes, or you're putting together insights from like some research. So you're like contributing like pieces to a deliverable. As a senior associate on the deliverable front, you're owning entire deliverables, right? Or at least work streams within a deliverable, right? So you're owning all the customer research, which includes a bunch of tasks, or you're owning all of the external research, which includes a bunch of tasks, right? So deliverable wise, your scope of ownership is a lot larger. On the trust front, you know, as an associate, you're building trust with your team. As an associate, you've built trust with your team, but you're also starting to build trust with your client, right? That's when you're starting to talk to your client, you're talking to stakeholders, presenting parts of your work. And then finally, I think mastering the learning part of the equation, right? So you learn a bunch of things, you get a bunch of feedback, but then it's really important to kind of consolidate that learning into things, into thinking of higher level concepts or strategy that you can apply to multiple things, right? And so really from associate to senior associate, your scope of ownership is expanded, and the expectations of what you have of being able to employ what you have learned is expanded, right? So like a fantastic example of a senior associate to me is I had, and I talked about this in a different episode, but I had this associate that would make sure that, you know, every slide was consistent, you know, spacing, quality, typos, grammar. Every single bullet point in every slide would be like a so what. They would constantly ask the rest of the team, so what? What does this mean? What can we do about it? And they would also frame things in a, we're doing this so that we can accomplish this, right? Like that's a really good way of thinking that a senior associate now employs, which an associate might not.
And so I agree with that. I think I have some perspective here as well. And the first thing before I kind of go into what I think of with a senior associate is, to an extent, associate, senior associate is going to look at different things based on the firm you're at. So look at your, you know, performance management site, whatever is aligned expectation wise, but also go have meetings with your project lead, with your coach, and say, what does a good associate look like here? What does a good senior associate look like here? And then check in with them as you go and see how you're delivering against those expectations. And so I also wanted to share some perspectives I have on the variation between associate and senior associate. Associate, like I said, number one to me is you're curious and learning. And so you're pulling things in and you're starting to understand them. So when I look at someone's senior associate, a few things I expect is you're not just pulling in anymore. You're actually starting to push out your own ideas, your own hypotheses. You're not asking me what I need to do. You're saying, I think this is what we should do. Let me go take a first draft at it and show you. And the farther you get down that senior associate spectrum towards manager, I expect you to be knowing exactly what the timeline looks like, managing the project, managing the associates, and coming and managing up to me or your manager or whatever to help make sure that quality is on track, time is on track, and you're bringing a strong perspective that will help make sure there's success. So that's how I kind of think about the difference there. Not sure what you guys think.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And well, I think and so maybe we should then dive into like the next thing, right? So we have like a couple steps on the ladder, which is, you know, associate, you have to learn, you have to build trust with your team. Senior associate, you have to sort of like master learning, start thinking bigger picture, own more deliverables, and build trust with your client, right? So you kind of have these two steps on the ladder, and we'll cover in the future episode, like how do you get to manager? Because there's another step on the ladder, and really like performing well in a team is understanding what every single step in that ladder is. But let's cover these two for now. And then so let's think like, you know, one fundamental thing that I always tell my associates is, if you want to be the next thing, you have to start acting like it, right? Like you the way that it works in corporate America, and especially in consulting, is you don't get it unless you can prove that you're already doing it, right? And so like you have to be acting the senior associate. So then let's talk about like, all right, well, conceptually, like I kind of know like what a senior associate is like responsible for, but let's like talk about tactically, how do you act like a senior associate? What do you guys think?
So I think sorry, go ahead, Serena, you go first.
It's fine. Go.
So one thing I'd say is showing up with confidence, because to me, even if you are interviewing to be an associate, if you come in kind of groveling and like, oh, I don't know anything, I'm going to immediately treat you different than someone who walks in the door with confidence, speaking to me person to person, and who can share what they're good at, where they want to improve, and bringing confidence. So for me, one of the main signs that triggers this associate is starting to act more like a senior associate. Yes, quality, but also taking ownership that they can deliver quality and being able to speak and present themselves in a more professional, confident way.
To give me an example.
So I can tell you, like I basically said, I've done a lot of interviewing of incoming associates, and I've seen people who you look at their resume, it looks really polished. They went to a great university, they're in their consulting club, and they can't show up as someone who's ready to speak to a client. And so when I have spoken with individuals who, let's say, even again, coming on to associate, and they can speak to me as I would expect them to speak to a client, much more likely to feel like this is a fit for our firm, not only because I feel like I can show them to a client if we train them up, but I also feel like they can act as an example to their peers.
Serena, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Certainly coming in with that aspect of executive presence, which in our very first episode talked a little bit about and what that showing up looks like. I think the other aspect that I've seen stand out and personally just gotten feedback on is anticipating the needs, right? Anticipating the needs.
That's so big.
Your direct leader of your team, and then ultimately your client, whether it's an internal client or external client. And so what does that mean, anticipating needs? It's truly trying to put yourself in the shoes of the other person and saying, what is it that they're looking for? And how can I solve for that? What's on their mind? And like, how do I start breaking that down so that I understand their point of view and come in to address concerns that they may have, risks that they may have, whether it's about, again, my specific output or my broader team's output. So again, thinking in that same way, proactive as an associate, but now in the lens of other people that you're engaging with.
One like really good example of that, I had a really good senior associate. In passing, we saw a very senior stakeholder on the client side, and he kind of walked by, and we're like, oh hey, how are you doing? How's everything going? And he goes, there's a lot going on, and because we actually had five projects with that client. There were just different work streams, different teams doing 5 different projects with that client. And he goes, there's a lot going on. I just I can't wait for the outputs, but I wish I knew, I wish I had a good view of everything that was going on, right? And then he walked away. And my senior associate at the time listens to that, and this is anticipating needs, right? And or kind of very proactively reacting to needs. She goes, "Oh, that we got to do something now." Right. And so from that one sentence of I wish I knew what was going on across the board, she says, all right, we should put together a program dashboard of all the 5 projects, the status of all 5 projects, how close we are to finishing all 5 projects. And then and we need to go reach out to every head of every project and then get the status report so we could give this to them on a weekly basis. We should also set up a weekly call with that client, right? Like holy shit, that is some anticipating needs, right? From one line of I wish I knew what was going on. You basically created an entire track of stuff to do to provide probably a tremendous amount of value for that one client stakeholder, right? That's a great example of anticipating needs or at the very least is understanding needs where they're not explicitly laid out to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, this aspect of anticipating and giving visibility and ambiguity is really critical. So even, when I've been on, very large enterprise projects where there's probably 10 different project teams and basically no one raises their hand. And so no one raises their hand to take ownership. And so everyone is sort of bitching and complaining about, oh my gosh, everything is so chaotic. And it's okay, well, how do we just look to stand up a central meeting or have a central communication? And that can be a starting point and we can iterate on that. So, if that was my personal experience being in a really difficult project of just saying, hey, I'll sign myself up, probably not within my team's direct remit, but we'll at least start to get some structure. And that in that way gave myself some credibility across the set of people, 20 people working on a project. And it's all right, well, A, she takes initiative, B, she can anticipate needs. And then C, it's all right, adding some structure to a really unclear situation.
And so hearing you guys makes total sense. It's something I want to add is these are all things that can make you a really good associate consultant, right? But if we're trying to get to senior associate, I think want to bring in the aspect of what technically is also going to get there. Because it depends on the size of your firm and how roundtables look. But I think personal brand is incredibly important at a firm, because when you get to roundtables and your coach is representing you, there's like usually, from my experience, a few things that happen. They look at your metrics. If you don't hit metrics, it's going to be a hard argument, right? So you need to hit your metrics. After that, it's like, has this person done anything that will put them beyond tenure track? And if you've just been doing an excellent job and your client loves you, and I've had multiple associates that I've coached where they're embedded in a client, they don't have anyone from their team from our firm, like on their team, and they're killing it. It's awesome. Their client loves them, but the rest of the firm, their coach, the majority of partners don't know anything about them. Roundtables come, they're really excited, but no one in the firm can really look at that person and say, they're a star, they're a superstar, we got to push them over. They're operating in a little like microcosm. So one thing I think is really important is the things that both of you are saying about, anticipating needs, not only with clients, but within your team, because you need advocates at roundtables. You need partner level saying like, oh, this kid always brings me research on the industry I'm in charge of. He's a go-getter. Or this person helps me with this internal initiative. I know that they've just got what it takes. You've got to show who you are and help and build relationships, or you're just going to be a utilization number at the end of the day, which puts you on tenure track.
Yeah, interesting. So anticipating is also like, let's talk about like the work then, right? Because I think anticipating needs can be, or anticipating what is needed is a good way of framing many different things. So anticipating what is needed from a client, anticipating what is needed from your team, and then anticipating what is needed from the work. Like all of these things are anticipating what is needed, right? And so like even on a work basis, like I've had bad associates where we say, hey, I need where I would say, hey, I need an example of good customer service. Can you go find me an example of good customer service? And a bad associate would go, Nordstrom has good customer service because they let you return your clothing even if it's like 6 months used, and you can return it anywhere, and that's like really convenient, and so that's good customer service. That is a bad associate output, right? A really good associate output is Nordstrom does this fine. But what it does for you, the impression that it gives to a customer is, well, I trust Nordstrom for quality because they will take back anything that I don't like, right? The other insight is, well, that's good because it maximizes the buyer's convenience, so that I know if I need something conveniently, I can go to Nordstrom the next time I go. It also is like, it gives me the impression that Nordstrom doesn't want to nickel and dime me as a customer. And so like, yeah, it's what Nordstrom does, but then it's like what does it mean, right? There's like a bad associate version, there's a good associate version. And that's an actual example where if you give me like a surface thing, I still got to go ahead and do the thinking myself. Like I need some of the critical thinking from you as an associate to be really good, right? And like a senior associate kind of masters the sort of critical thinking part of work, right? Because that's also very much what's needed. Tell me about, and I know we've talked about like ownership a little bit, like tell me how that's different.
As far as ownership, what that boils down to is, are you the one responsible, right? We all probably are aware of the framework RACI. So who's responsible, accounted for, consulted, informed. And so when you take ownership, that means you're taking responsibility on getting to the desired outcome of what that question or task or deliverable may represent. So I think that is taking ownership. I think also the other element of taking ownership is when things go wrong, being responsible for that as well, and delivering some bad news, whether it's about a delay, whether it's about things slipping, whether it's about an incorrect assumption that might have led to a lot of rework. So, taking ownership of not just the good, but also the bad is what makes, I think, a respected, and amenable like senior associate.
Okay, Carrie, what do you think? It's a really good point about ownership, where just like owning outcomes, owning deliverables, owning quality is really important, and that's different from an associate to a senior associate. What have you seen the same thing?
Similar. I'd say I really agree with what Serena said about ownership essentially being accountability at the associate level. So if
That's
someone
great.
can, just show up and own what they're doing, even if it's a mistake, that's what I need to see. For a senior associate, I think it does change. For me, a senior associate, like we've said earlier, owns part of a deliverable. And so I would like them also, this is something I love, and I've had it happen, is when a senior associate comes up to me and says, I want to own this part of the project. I want
love
to
that.
own interviews, and I'm going to take care of all of this, and then keeps me apprised versus coming and asking or waiting to see what's next. So John, it sounds like you also have experienced.
No, I love that. I love that when it happens, because like ownership is not just like, I want to do it and I want to say I did it, right? Like that's fine, but you have to own, like truly own it. You have to own all the good, you have to own all the bad, and you have to own everything in between. So like one thing that I always say to junior associates is, when it leaves your table, before it gets to my table, before you send it to me, I need it to be perfect. I don't want to go back and double check your shit, right? Like when it leaves your table, make sure it is ready to leave your table, right? Like you don't want to hand it to me with typos, don't want to hand it to me where your boxes are all messed up. You want to hand it to me where like it wasn't fully thought out. The worst that, because that's expensive for me to look at, right? So you own your thing. If you want to own it, right? So be proud of the quality, be proud of everything that you're putting out, like truly own the thing, right? And I think some associates get that, and I think some people really struggle with it, right? Because with the sort of like before it leaves your table kind of thing, is like you have to check it, right? I don't know if you've seen the same thing.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I think so. I have definitely seen, and it is very frustrating when you see the same. So I know there was an episode already on what is a not good associate, but one of the most frustrating things is when something is very simple, like a spell check or a grammar, and you've told the person again and again and again, and they do not change it. And this is, again, is I would say an opportunity for either a really good associate or for a senior associate. If you notice that happening on your team, you help them. You become the person between, let's say, the manager, senior manager, and that associate to make sure by the time the work product gets to that higher end, it isn't there. So don't be the bad senior associate or associate. Check your work. And if you want to make sure that you're delivering a high quality, make sure your peers and team are doing well as well.
Yeah, like be ready to stand by your work when it leaves your table. I think, right? Like that, because that is what's happening. You're now in the real world. It's not college anymore. It's not going to someone like a buddy to review. It is now you're now professionally delivering it to the next person that needs to take that and deliver something professionally to their client, right? So make sure it's ready. Serena, you agree with that?
Yeah, no, it's certainly about having these gate checks and making sure that you're passing those for yourself before it moves forward. I think the other perspective as devil's advocate is, yes, there's an aspect of like being proactive and taking ownership, but I think there are certain senior associates that feel like they are ready when they're not. And so they take on too much. And they tend to be overloaded and they say yes to everything. And obviously that's a delicate dance between themselves and their manager. But sometimes, like, I've seen it. I've been in that position. I'm like too overeager and then I just don't do things justice. And so having that, again, self reflection as well as just awareness of saying, hey, I'm dropping the ball and like I need to just start delegating or hand things back because I just don't have the bandwidth. I think that's another element of showing maturity as a senior associate, because I think we all tend to want to do really well and be high achievers, but The other flip side is actually saying no and knowing where boundaries are so that you can be successful and your team can be successful as a result.
Have you had to give feedback like that? Like, have you had to say like, hey, bud, like you gotta like stop asking for stuff. Like you have to get good at the stuff you already have.
Yeah, for sure. I've had certain direct reports that are like, hey, I have so much bandwidth. It's like, yeah, you have bandwidth, but like, look at the quality of what you have. It's probably like 70% and you haven't really like completed the task at hand, right? So it's really knowing that. And again, having the right relationship perhaps with your team to make sure you know your boundaries.
And I just want to add something to that because I actually haven't had that experience with associates, senior associates I've worked with. It's usually instead I want to be seen as someone who's really good at my role and who can take anything. And I'm terrified of saying that I can't. And so what happens is they can't show up, quality starts to drop, but they're too scared to admit like, hey, this might be too much for me. So I think that's really important. One of you just said being self-aware. Should know that your manager, senior manager, whoever you're working with is not going to get mad at you because you tell them realistically what you need and what you can do well on. They'll probably be grateful so they can better manage their resources and have a higher quality outcome. So don't be afraid, be honest. And again, this goes back to ownership and accountability. I think that's how it really comes together.
Yeah. Yeah, good. So, and maybe let's talk about like, because I've seen that kind of be extrapolated in one particular area, which is like interacting with clients. Let's talk about interacting with clients, right? Because there is a pretty material difference between an associate and how much they interact with a client, and then a senior associate and how much they interact with a client. Like that's sort of a 0 to 1 thing, right? Carrie, what do you think? Like, what does an associate do with in I guess FaceTime with a client versus a senior associate?
Yeah. So I'd say, given that I see there's so many factors that play into it. So for example, if there's an associate who I look at their work and it is on point and they can speak to it well, absolutely going to put them in front of a client. And I've done that before. But whether associate or senior associate, if you can't be confident and show up and I'm ready to answer the questions, right? I'm not going to put you in front of the client. The one thing I will say though, from client interaction, one thing I've learned both myself and also with associates and senior associates that I've coached is it's revs. So you have to express that you're interested in talking to the client. You have to realize the first time you do it, it's probably going to be bumpy. You're going to have to practice a lot. But the more and more you do it, it's going to become second nature. And it can be a very powerful skill and help you progress quickly when you are able to speak to clients well. So get out there, try to do it. You won't be perfect. Continue to practice.
We could probably do like an entire thing on like speaking with confidence and then like interacting with clients confidently. That's a really big topic. Like if you, I guess like viewers or listeners, if you're interested in that, let us know, or if you have questions, we can react to them. But like that's the next stage, right? Like there's a huge difference between associate. Like there are no senior, so there are no let's say there are no managers that can't interact with a client, right? Like you can't, there's a cap on, if you can't interact with a client, there's a cap on what you can make it to. That cap is often also at senior associate, right? And so like, so like owning participation with clients and really expanding that out. Serena, like have you seen like big improvements from people to person on interaction with clients?
Yeah, I mean, I recall as an associate, I was very much behind the scenes. John, you've mentioned this, taking notes. Always the one taking notes, sending recaps, cameras not on, pretty much not in the room. And then as a senior associate, you start to have some of that visibility, right? Because now you at least can read the room because you had some of that experience as an associate, and you kind of understand the type of nomenclature and language and interaction and what does that look like, and you start emulating that. I would say when I started working with clients, the main feedback I got was to be more succinct. So I tend to be very wordy because I usually just think out loud, and in front of clients, you just have to get to the point, right? You have to say this, these are my 3 supporting reasons, and this is the takeaway. Whereas I kind of like would drown on with data and like side facts, and it's like no one cares. So that was a lot of my own practice. And Carrie talked about talking points. Like I would rehearse my 2 slides that I would maybe get to at the end of the appendix because I was like, all right, I really got to hit these things home. So for me personally, it's about being succinct and the so what.
Yeah. The point, yeah. Yeah, I tend to be wordy too. I tend to
Everyone
ramble a
is.
little bit. I think all
rein it in.
all consultants just love hearing themselves talk. So all consultants have to just cut it down, be better about it. So like I was really lucky because my first project, I had a pretty large speaking role, where I interviewed like 35 pretty senior stakeholders, like director and above, stakeholders. So I was pretty lucky because I had direct FaceTime with the client. That project had no one in between me and the director. So I was basically playing all roles. So that I learned really quickly. So I was lucky, but there is and we'll do an episode about this, I think, but it's like how do you get past your initial like shaky, stuttery, lack of confidence talk to being able to talk to a bunch of C-suite in a room to say like, what did John find out? Like that's a really daunting thing, right? But yeah, so I agree. I think a senior associate now owns some interaction with the client, right? Is that, as an associate, you're maybe owning parts of a deliverable or like supporting evidence, supporting material that goes into a deliverable. So there might be opportunity to talk about, specifics of your small research. But as a senior associate, you're now responsible for large portions of the deliverable or entire deliverables. Now, in that case, you are the expert on that deliverable, right? So you are the person to speak to it. The manager above is sort of responsible for the entire project and the outcomes of the entire project, or at least the project stream. But as a senior associate, you are the expert on the deliverable. So of course you're going to be interacting with the client because you're going to deliver that deliverable, present it. You're going to talk about it. They're going to have questions. You're going to have to answer questions. And so you are going from 0 to 1 of not really interacting with the client to interacting with the client for the entire scope of a deliverable. So it is a pretty material difference. That's something to work on when you want to get to for getting to senior associate.
And yeah, and you make an interesting point, John, about your engagement was with C-suite, senior levels of management. I would say there are certain projects in which it's probably a little lower stakes and therefore is good practice ground. So yeah. I think that's also can be reassuring that you're not always interfacing with these like big scary titles.
Yeah. Lots of opportunities for that. And then also like to Carrie's point earlier, like ask for it, right? Like get to it, ask for it, ask for someone to help you practice. The consulting is fundamentally like a pretty talky job, right? And so you're not a researcher, you're not a back-end developer, you're not it's a pretty talky job. So it is a very important skill set to build. As table stakes, we kind of assume that you have it and you did well at your interview. And so like you kind of have some of the groundwork there, but like buttoning it up and then polishing up that presence is really important. Carrie, you look like you were going to say something.
Yeah, because I hope we do a whole section on this. I'm very passionate about this topic, but I would say 2 things on that note that I think are really important. Just touching back again about asking for opportunity. I think part of it is just finding someone who will give you the opportunity, but also someone that you can watch them and learn from them. So if you want to be doing it, it's not just sitting in the background and be like, oh, I would like to do that. It's like actually taking notes on what you see and what works and thinking about how you do it. And then when you have the opportunity, which you should ask for, don't wait around to be given it, but you should immediately say beforehand, this is the type of thing I'm going to try. Do you have any advice? And afterwards, how did I do? But John, you were just saying something I think is also really important around readiness. Something that I always say to my associates and senior associates I work with is before we go and practice together, I want you to go think about the absolute hardest or weirdest questions a client could possibly ask you. And then we get together before that meeting, I'm going to ask you a bunch of really weird questions, some really hard ones. And so I'm not telling you what they are now, but that kind of readiness is essential to feeling confident and ready when you go in, because you've already thought all the things through. So that's kind of how I think about it. But I would just want to, I think one more thing worth talking about is the fear behind it. And I will say from my own experience, when I started, literally every time I was going to go into a meeting speaking or lead an interview, I got like cold feet. I was like shaking. I was like terrified. I was like, can I say I'm sick? Can I just ask someone else to do it? Push yourself through that and it gets easier. And now when I work with, I have a senior associate I work with who said, oh, I don't have the experience or background in this one. Maybe I'll sit it out. I said, just because you said it that way, you are absolutely leading this. You're just, no way you're not. And so you got to push through it to advance.
Yeah, I mean, like, and we'll move on because for timing, but like, look, ultimately you are responsible for your own career growth, right? Like, I think Carrie, you pushing throwing someone into the deep end of the pool, like that's really strong and that's really good for an advocate, but not everyone's going to do that for their associate, right? Like you have to do it. You have to jump into the deep end, and really make yourself uncomfortable. But okay, so let's move on, right? So I think like, okay, so we understand what an associate is. We understand what a senior associate is. We understand how to act the senior associate. So then like, let's talk for a bit about like, okay, well now how do you go about wanting to get a promotion? How do you like put the wheels in motion for that promotion? The first thing I want to talk about is communicating your intent for senior associate early and communicating it often. Serena, like how did this go for you, or how did this go for some of the people that let's say like that you promoted to a senior associate?
Yeah, as a people leader, hiring my initial associates, truly understanding what their motivations are, like creating that dialogue, creating that space, I think is really important. And so, advice to folks out there: if your leader isn't that forward with you, you can go to them and tell them, these are my aspirations, these are my goals, and this is why I desire and am motivated to do this. And again, that shows you taking initiative and to a degree anticipating their needs, because at the end of the day, they're going to have to write your year end or mid-year and hopefully tie back these aspects to that discussion. So, I think that's really important. And then in the past, we've talked about this as well, but making sure that along the way, you're building connections across the firm and across different teams so that your brand gets elevated. You have credibility as a not just a good performer, but a strong performer in very specific areas. Perhaps it's data analytics, or perhaps it's customer insight. So having these talk tracks for others to advocate on your behalf is highly important. And then the third is being visible, right? Being visible, which Carrie mentioned as well, which is like being part of your employee engagement. So in your office, are you volunteering for certain activities to help lead and be engaged in the organization? Are you participating in D&I events and programming? So I think there's a lot of different ways in which you can show up. And so those are just some examples.
And I'll add there is like, look, showing up is really important, but communicating it is also extremely important. So in episode 1, we talked about like selling your wins. We talked about if you did a 10 out of 10 job, but you talked about it like a 3 out of 10, at the end of the year, they're going to think you did a 3 out of 10, right? And regardless of what you actually did. And and again, you own your career development, not anyone else, right? If you think about it from a perspective of like your manager or like your director, they don't have time to invest time to make like kind of squeeze out of you what you want out of your career. Like you have to take that into your own hands. So communicating is really important. What I would say is communicate your intention. That literally means my goal this year is to get senior associate. And tell everybody that you work with that is higher up, right? So communicate with on every project that you have, tell every manager, every director, every, I don't know, if you manage to get time with a partner, tell them, I guess. But tell them you want senior associate. But say, I want senior associate. What can I do for you what can I do for you on this project that would make me look like a senior associate too, right? Like figure out what can you do for them so that they can do that for you. Tell everybody that you work with on your projects. Tell your coach very early so that your coach can start to frame his year-end review for you, as well as your relationship partner, if you have a relationship partner. And then finally is, like Serena said, everyone that you interact with, that you volunteer, you do extracurriculars for, that you put time on something, tell them as well. Tell like every single person that is more senior that you want senior associate, and tell them often, remind them, right? Not all the time, maybe like quarterly or month or something like that, right? Like tell them. Carrie, I know you've had experience with this.
Yes. And I think there's also a continuation of that I wanted to share, because it reminds me of a coachee I have that went through something similar. They really want to get promoted at the end of the year. And we have a quarterly or by project system where you're rated 1 through 5 across a few different factors. And that actually goes into weighting whether you get promoted or your year-end rating at the end of the year. And so essentially, they were working really hard, getting fantastic feedback. Then they get their rating, and it was 4 to 5 across the board. And they came to me like, I don't understand. All these different things are happening. Didn't have any of it documented. I was like, first thing, you need to get that documented. But the second thing I said was, all right, well, you need to go and communicate what you want and then track your progress. So if you want 5 out of 5s, go to your project leader, start of the project, say, I want to get 5 out of 5s. What does that look like? Mid-project, am I doing 5 out of 5? What do I need to do to get 5 out of 5? And if let's say you're hearing all the lip service of, yes, you're 5 out of 5, great, wonderful, but it shows up as 4 out of 5, get it in writing, like, hey, sending you an email, am I a 5 out of 5, so that everyone is held accountable. But yes, communicating and then making it very clear and tracking it, absolutely need to be doing that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Serena.
I also want to add, I feel like I always come in with like the counter point of view, but I've had experiences where, and I've been on both sides, where I felt more ready than what other people felt was more ready. So, and then I've had folks on my team that are like, hey, I've been in role for like 3 years. I'm ready because I just have the time in role. And it's like, well, you haven't hit these specific characteristics or attributes. So, having continuous dialogue, I think, is really important to set expectations on both sides. Yeah. And then also being just very direct and like, hey, how real is this going to happen for me this year? If hopefully you can have that type of rapport and relationship with your coach or sponsor, because I think at the end of the day, like there can be disappointment, and that disappointment is a result of maybe the firm isn't doing well, and therefore they can't promote the same number of people as they had planned for at the start of the year. The group isn't doing well. It's not hitting the number. So there are a lot of variables that are just outside of your control. And the more you can understand what they are, I think the better off you set yourself up for success, as well as to sometimes disappointment.
And so I just want to say that completely agree with that. And it reminds me of something you said earlier, which is some people wanting to take on everything and thinking they're doing a great job. And so this is something I've actually talked to John about as well, is essentially sometimes you need to be like shown your place, for lack of a better word. Like as a consultant, you need to understand that sometimes what you're doing isn't at the quality you think it is, or you are taking too much. So I think for associates who are scared of that, it's okay. It will happen. Don't be afraid of it. Continue to push yourself. When it does happen, the best thing to do is listen, understand, and integrate that feedback so you can improve and try again. So that's kind of my thoughts in there.
I'd be curious.
And the worst that you could do is like take that commentary, that feedback or the result, and like, go the wrong way with it, right? I mean, obviously in the moment it feels real shitty, and like you can wallow in that sadness because gotta tell you, there were times in which I was crying outside of the office because I was so disappointed on not being the next promoted. And so we all have those feels. And then you got to just pick yourself up and be like, okay, you evaluate, is this firm going to support me in the next tranche? And like, is that going to be a reality? And can I believe in that? Can I believe in my leaders? And can I believe in some of the patients that I have to just invest time through?
I'd be curious, like if any listeners or watchers, if anyone has like, because to Carrie's point, you need your ass kicked. Like you're going to get your ass kicked at least a couple times in your professional career, right? And you need it. You need to know where your boundaries are, and like when you're asking for too much or when you have overstepped your bounds, you need your ass kicked. And you're going to get your ass kicked. And so like, I would love to hear if anyone stories of people getting their ass kicked and how to bounce back from that. I would also love to hear, if people need help or have questions about like, how do I know that this is in the right place for me that's conducive to my upward movement, right? And because we've certainly all dealt with that. And I want to move on to the last thing, which is like, all right, so now we've communicated. I've told every single person that I want to be a senior associate. I told everybody that I want an exceeds across the board. And also I'm not asking too much.
You told your family, your significant
my family,
other, your friends.
Yeah,
everyone knows.
Every single person knows. Now, how do you prepare for your review? Carrie, how do you prepare for your review by the end of the year?
Well, something I tell my coachees, and I think there's two things that happen. One is your metrics that you don't have control over. I would say maybe a different session is worth talking about utilization, because that can be a huge stressor. But if your metrics are great. If they're under, you need a narrative. So work with your coach in the narrative of everything else that you've done and why maybe your utilization isn't where the metrics say it should be. On the other side of things, and I think, John, you mentioned this earlier, that you should be considering this endpoint your entire journey. So if client sends you an email, it's like, great job on this, capture it, save it down in a folder, like a praise folder. Seek that, anytime feedback, have your coach document things. Continue to chase down your ratings and the reason behind, like, build your case, have it. And the other thing is, I always say to my coachees, share that folder with me so I can go in at any point. So I just want to be and see how things are building, meet with me regularly, sing your praise or your stories of the praise that you've got, so that by the time I, as a coach, have to sit down and write your review, I'm totally bought in, I understand, and I can be invested and excited when I make my case for you. So.
Dude, I still have that. Like, I still have my wins folder, right? Like, I'm a senior director VP. I still have my folder of other VPs or MDs that have been like, John, this is really great. I love our collaboration together. I still have that folder, and that folder I still forward to my boss wherever I am, right? Because like, hey, it's all about communicating your wins. Like, if you did nothing for the year, but you're a great communicator of wins, you can last a really long time, surprisingly. And so I still have that. Everyone should have a folder of wins. I don't know, Serena, if you have that, but I think everyone should have that.
Yeah, I have a folder of like people who acknowledged my contributions, and then also I just have my own like running lists of impact and objectives that I hit outside of just like the regular OKR quarterly goal setting.
So you need your list of all your projects, hopefully where you've gotten 5 out of 5 or exceeds on everything because you've communicated it often. So you have that. You also have your little wins folder of like, good job, John. Good job, Carrie. This thing was great. Serena, I loved the interview that you ran for us, right? You have your little folder of wins and feedback from your client, or your volunteer, the people that you volunteer with, or your internal project team. You collect all of that for your coach and for your relationship partner. What else do you need? Because I think like the other thing that you need is you actually need extracurriculars. It's like high school all over again and college all over again, right? Like you have your classwork, you have your project work, but you need extracurriculars. You need to be contributing to the firm outside of your project. You need the pitches that you've helped out with, the firm development that you helped out with, practice development that you helped out with, methodology you need to have helped with that. What does that look like for you, Carrie?
So I'm controversial on this. I think that the role of extracurriculars it's different based on your level. And I think there's also soft, kind of like fluffy extracurriculars and things that will help you advance your career. Both can be valuable and make you feel better at work, but if you want to get promoted, focus on the activities that will bring you closer in relationship building to the people in the roundtable room who will advocate for you.
Yeah.
That's
Play the game a little
be
bit.
selective. Yeah. Play the role. I mean, there's benefits to both sides, but if you are hungry to be promoted, you have limited time, use it well. And like you at the start of that, John, you said, what are the other things you need to do? First thing that came in my head, which I've done, and when I was coming up was, okay, roundtables are around the corner. I am making a year-end recap meeting with every single partner I've worked with to talk through the exciting things I've achieved this year, remind them like, hey, anything you've seen from me, any feedback, just so that I'm primed in the back of their brain. They go into roundtable, they say, Carrie, what should we do with Carrie? And then all of a sudden these voices would remember me, the times that we had worked together, the contributions I'd made, and could advocate for me if they felt positively. So be selective and find advocates.
Yeah. What else? Anything else on the preparing for your review for the end of the year? We have project performance, we have your wins and feedback folder, and then we have your involvement in selective high impact extracurriculars. What else? Anything else?
So I have one other thing I'd say, and it's less about preparing for roundtables, but more about after you have done absolutely everything that you can, let that go from your mind. There is no point in stressing over, will you get the promotion? Will you get the year-end rating? Everything while the process is going through. Focus on your work. And again, the people around you, things that make you happy, and recognize that you have put in the work, the time, the effort, and the results are pending. So that interim period is really not worth the pain and stress of hyper focusing on it. And if you don't get the outcome that you expected, that's not the end of the world. Work through it, discover why. You'll start the next year and move forward from there. But I think part of that next step is just disengaging from that process a little bit so you have time to refresh.
All right. Well, so that's great. Final words before we kind of close it out. Serena, you have anything else that you want to help our junior associates in their journey to senior associatedom?
I think we've summed it up pretty well. And look, you gotta focus what is right in front of you, getting that done really well, and then being proactive, anticipating needs, and then looking at ways in which you raise your visibility and profile. So I think we've touched across all these points, and we'll chat next time.
I have a thing that I would add, which essentially is being an associate can be very hard because you can be thrown grunt work, you can be in charge of crossing the T's, dotting the I's, and feeling like you're left out of the actual strategy work, and that can be frustrating. So my message to associates is this is the period for you to understand the business that you're in and learn and see and grow. I would say don't give up or feel like this is all that you will get because you're in this entry role. I would say that if you're an associate and absolutely hates it and you wash out because you want other things, great. But if you just feel like it's hard, keep pushing because more and more opportunities will come your way. And that's when you really get to start experiencing what the full-blown consultant experience looks like. That's my perspective.
I'll also add to that like the grunt work training that you get as a consulting associate preps you for that everywhere, right? Like the quality in which you get trained for work as a consultant, if you can tough it out, you will see that is higher quality than at most places. The standard and expectation is much higher at consulting. And then so when you move on to manager, director, at the very least, you will know what the utmost quality of work looks like, right? And so that's really important. But okay, so today,
You know
hey,
what?
we
Last
talked.
comment for me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Last comment is like, if you don't make it a senior associate, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. I think that's also a last like tidbit that I have with our audience. Like there are many different career paths and it doesn't have to be in consulting. Obviously we all have started from there, but not all of us have stayed. And so we'll explore what the other steps could look like. And so don't get disappointed if it doesn't happen or if this isn't the right environment for you.
Yeah, great. So, okay, so today we talked about the ladder. So what is expected and what is the role of an associate versus a senior associate? Because you need to know both to be able to get from one to the other. We talked about how to act like a senior associate, right? What do you have to do for work? What do you have to do for ownership, participation with a client? And then engaging different parties within your team and outside your team. And then we talked about communicating your intentions early to everyone that you interact with, communicating what you want, how to get there, and what can you do for them to get there. And then finally, like we talked about the few things that you have to prep for your year-end review, right? Because you're going to head into roundtables. Everyone that's advocating for you is going to need evidence to fight for you, right? And so you're basically prepping that package of evidence for them to do that. If you have questions, let us know, drop a comment. If there's a particular thing you want to learn more about, we're happy to do an episode on that or react on that. But leave us comments and follow along for some more content. It's a tricky career to navigate, but we're here to help. All right. Thanks.